Okay, today we're going to look at perpendicular lines. We've looked at equations of a straight line. We've looked at parallel lines where they have the same gradient. So today let's look at perpendicular lines. So I'll just talk through how this works. So I'm just going to draw a sketch of a graph with axes. So we got our x coordinates, we've got our y coordinates. You should have seen all of this already, but perpendicular lines, perpendicular means at a right angle. Okay, we should have heard that before, okay, that word. So if I have two lines on a graph, let's suppose this is imagine it's a straight line, we'll call that line 1. Line 1 has equation y equals, let's call it 1/4 x, crosses the y-axis at -2, so the y-intercept is -2. And then I've got another line that comes down here. We're going to call this one line 2, L2. And let's give this equation y equals -4x plus 10. Okay, so perpendicular means at a right angle. So these two lines are perpendicular. They're telling you that bit of information. Right, what's the link between perpendicular lines? That is the question. There is always a link between perpendicular lines, and it's all to do with the gradient. Okay, the gradients link perpendicular lines. Okay, but how? What's interesting about these two gradients? The gradient of line 2 is -4. The gradient of line 1 is 1/4. Okay, now the link is, and it's quite easy to play with once you've practiced it a little bit. Okay, so the link is 1/4 times by -4, taking the two gradients, is equal to -1. Now, we've seen something like this before where they wouldn't necessarily multiply to -1, but they would multiply to 1. But anyway, I'll talk about that in a minute. So whenever you have two perpendicular lines, their gradients will multiply to make -1. Okay, so if you get one of the gradients, then you can work out the other gradient by dividing -1 by that number, okay, by that gradient. So that's one way of getting the gradient for the other perpendicular line. If you've been given the equation or just the gradient, you don't need the y-intercept, you just need the gradient bit. Okay, so if you've been given the gradient, then you just divide -1 by the gradient and you would get the other gradient, or the other way around, it doesn't really matter. Right, what this is, I don't know if you remember, but two numbers that multiply together to make 1 is called a reciprocal. But because this multiplies together to make -1, then we're looking for the negative reciprocals. Okay, so they are basically called negative reciprocals, and I'm going to go through the tricks in which we can find reciprocals and then the negative reciprocals. Okay, so the link is to find the negative reciprocal, and then we get the gradient of the second line. And I will go through some examples as well. So hold your horses. If you're not sure, maybe pause it, go back over what I've already just said. Okay, rewind, start again, and then try and understand the bit that you didn't quite get. All right, if you're okay and you're up to date and you're following this, then that's great. Okay, so I'm going to talk through how we find reciprocals again. and then move that on to finding negative reciprocals, because once you found the reciprocal, you just change the sign. If it's a negative, it becomes a positive. If it's a positive, it becomes a negative. That's it. So if I had a number, let's talk about the numbers that we could have, and we will find the reciprocals of that number. And then all I'm going to do is find the negative reciprocal. And I'm going to go through the rules in which we use. Right, if I had a gradient of, let's say, if I had a number 4, then the reciprocal of a whole number is just 1 over 4. Okay. And the negative reciprocal means I change the sign that's in front of it. So this becomes a -1/4. Right, if I had a number, or in our case a gradient, because this is generally the main time you use negative reciprocals, if I had a gradient of 3/5, then my reciprocal of this gradient would be 5/3, and the negative reciprocal would mean I changed the sign. Okay, so this is a positive, so this becomes a negative. So the negative reciprocal would be -5/3. So if I got given an equation, one of these equations, and it had a gradient of 3/5, I know the equation of the line perpendicular to that is -5/3. Remember, this perpendicular line could move anywhere. It could be a right angle anywhere along this line. So what actually makes this line important is also the y-intercept, the point at which it crosses the y-axis. But we'll get to that in a minute. Right, if I had a number of -1/8, then the reciprocal of that is, what do I times that by to make 1? That's going to be -8. Okay, these pairs of numbers multiply to make 1. They multiply to make 1. They multiply to make 1. So the negative reciprocal is I change the sign of that. So this becomes 8. Okay, so we just change the sign. So if I had 0.1 or -0.1, what do I minus 0 times -0.1 by to get 1? Well, that's -10. So the negative reciprocal is I change the sign and it becomes 10. Okay, so the trick here is we're going to be given, what we're going to be doing, the kind of questions we get is we're going to be given the equation of a line. We're going to say another line is perpendicular to it. So we're going to work out the negative reciprocal of the gradient, and we know that that's the gradient of the other line. Then they'll give us a coordinate, an x and y value, and we're going to have to figure out what the y-intercept is. So we can write the equation of the new line, the perpendicular line, in the form y equals mx plus c. Okay, because this is what they'll ask me to do. Find the equation of the line perpendicular. So I need the gradient, and then I'll need to work out the y-intercept. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. Write down the equation of the line. Okay, so the first example is perpendicular to this equation of a line, and it goes through the point 0, 5. So m equals, the gradient equals 3. So what we want is the negative reciprocal, so -1 over m equals -1 over 3. So the gradient of the new line, the perpendicular line, is -1 over 3. So we've got y equals -1 over 3, lots of x plus c. Okay, so that's how we work out the negative reciprocal. So this is the gradient of the line perpendicular to this line. So now I need to find it, the y-intercept, and I'm going to use these two coordinates, 0 and 5. If you know a little bit about this already, you might have already realized what the y-intercept is. But let's substitute these two values into the equation. Right, the y value is 5. The x value is 0. So it's minus 1/3 times 0 plus c. Well, minus 1/3 times 0 is just 0. So what we've got is 5 equals c. So now that we've found the c value, we can substitute that in, and we've got the equation of our line. Y equals minus 1/3 lots of x plus 5. And when I said you might have already figured it out, whenever you have an x coordinate of 0, that means it's crossing the y-axis when x is 0. So you know that this is the y-intercept. Okay, let's go through another example. So write down the equation of the line perpendicular to this line with gradient minus 5/3, and it also goes through the coordinate 4, 7/5. Okay, x coordinate 4, y coordinate 7/5. So if my gradient is m equals minus 5/3, then my minus 1/m, that means I'm going to flip this and change the sign. Okay, so that's what this 1/m with a minus is. I flip it and I change the sign. So if I flip it, I get 3/5. If I change the sign from a negative, it becomes a positive. So my general form of the perpendicular line is y equals 3/5 x plus c. So I just now need to work out the c coordinate. And to do that, I substitute in the x and the y. So y equals 7/5. Then I've got 3/5 times 4 plus c. Well, 3/5 times 4, well, that's going to be 3 times 4 over 5, which is 12/5 plus c. So I just need to calculate c. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 12/5 from both sides. Okay. So I get 7/5, take away 12/5 equals c. And because they're the same denominator, it's nice and easy. 7 take away 12 is 5. So we've got is minus 5, sorry. So it's minus 5/5 equals c. Well, actually, minus 5 divided by 5 is just minus 1. So I've got the c value. I just now need to put it back into this equation. Okay, I need to replace c with minus 1. So y equals 3/5 x minus 1, and that's the equation of the line that's perpendicular to the one they gave us originally. And it also goes through this point. Right, have a go at some of the questions, and I will speak to you soon. All right, have a great day.